Thursday, the 3rd of May. An unsettling experience. I got home from work yesterday, collected Rafiki, and walked up the stairs to my door. It was locked, as usual, but when I opened it, Rafi started barking furiously. I was immediately on my guard and stepped inside with some trepidation. At first glance, nothing appeared to have been touched, but Rafi was still on edge, rushing around the flat, in and out of every room, sniffing and barking. I followed him, checking behind doors, opening every cupboard, but there was no intruder. Then I closed the front door and jammed a wedge beneath it, and went to the hiding place. My relief that it hadn't been discovered, that none of my indicators had been disturbed, was immeasurable. Feeling more relaxed, I was going into the kitchen to put on the kettle, when my eye was caught by the pad beside the telephone. When I'm talking on the telephone, I tend to doodle with my left hand. I've always wanted to be ambidextrous for no particular reason, and practice when I'm talking. But the pad and pen were on the right. I froze inside. I went over to take a closer look. But other than that, there was no sign of tampering. Then I went back to the front door and opened it to examine the lock. I felt a shiver down my spine when I recognized the telltale scratches that even the most talented lockpicker can't avoid. Shutting it again, I drew across the chain and sat on the sofa, shaking slightly, thinking about what could have happened. I was almost certain that someone had been in my flat, and if that was indeed the case, what had they been looking for? At least they hadn't found the diaries. I thank every lucky star that my hiding place held up. Writing these is a betrayal of all my training, all my ethics. It's a risk I take every time I get out my pen and open the cover. I know I should stop, but that would be a greater betrayal of Pa. So I live with the guilt every day and try not to think about the enormity of the consequences if they were found. Not only would my career be finished instantly, but who knows how much damage would be wrought on the office. It takes something like this to force me to face up to it. And yet, at the same time, I feel compelled to reach for my pen to record my thoughts. Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
Shaken, but not stirred.
007 reporting for duty.
These are the 00 Files.
Welcome to the podcast of the 00 Files. My name is Don Zuiderman, and you are about to listen to a very special interview with Samantha Weinberg. Now, I have always considered myself to be more of a literary James Bond fan than a cinematic James Bond fan. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore the 007 films, but I even love the books more, especially the original Fleming novels and his short stories. I think those are brilliant. As a teenager, they were my greatest incentive to learn English. Fleming created the world of James Bond and invented many interesting characters, such as M, Tanner, and Miss Moneypenny. But we never learn very much about those characters in any of Fleming's books. They remain relative bystanders in James Bond's adventures. When the Moneypenny Diaries were first announced in 2005, many Bond fans were afraid that this was the worst idea ever. They envisioned a desperate move by Ian Fleming Publications to win over the female audience, or to change the character of Bond, or to write chick lit, or basically just publish a lot of nonsense. Well, they needn't have worried, because the books proved to be wonderfully written, smart, tense, and true to Fleming's original stories. In December 2014, I, for the first time, discovered the Moneypenny Diaries. I love audiobooks, and at the time my wife got me 3 credits to spend on audible.co.uk for Christmas. I decided to take a chance, and I bought all the 3 books at the same time without consulting any website or reading any review beforehand. And for the next month, I was completely absorbed in the world created by Samantha Weinberg. What you heard at the beginning of this podcast was a clip from the first book, Guardian Angel. It was narrated by British actress Eleanor Bron, who does an amazing job with these stories. I've added another clip at the end of the interview, which I took from the third book, Final Fling, which describes a lovely scene between James Bond and Jane Moneypenny. I highly appreciate the Moneypenny Diaries, and I consider them to be amongst the best of the 007 continuation novels. So it was an absolute pleasure that I was able to interview Samantha Weinberg almost a decade after these books were published. If you have never read the Moneypenny Diaries, you can quite easily buy an ebook version on Amazon or find copies on eBay. I tried to keep the interview as spoiler-free as possible, but at the same time insightful as well. Well, I probably failed on both accounts, but it was a lovely chat anyway. I hope you enjoy it too. So, let's listen to what Samantha has to say. Welcome, Samantha Weinberg, to our podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you, and I would really like to thank you for taking the time for this interview. I absolutely love your Moneypenny Diaries. They are very unique within the James Bond canon. It's been a while since I listened to them, because I never read your books. I only listened to them as an audiobook. But as soon as you said that you wanted to do this interview, I went back and I re-listened to all 3 of them. And it's absolutely wonderful that you are now able to have this interview.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be able to re-enter the Bond world, if briefly.
Yeah. So it's quite a while since you wrote the books. But before we actually go into that part of the interview to discussing the books, I always start my interviews with the 3 introduction 00 questions. Are you up for that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first one is, which James Bond film have you watched most recently, and why did you pick that one?
Well, actually, I watched Quantum of Solace, and that was because it happened to be on TV over Christmas. And I have to admit, I didn't get to the end. I wish I'd been watching Dr. No, because I think it's my favorite.
Oh, I love Dr. No as well. I think they did such a fantastic job, the first film out already.
Exactly.
But you didn't enjoy Quantum?
No, I think I just got, for me, it was just too involved. The story wasn't that plausible. No, because I'd loved Casino Royale and I loved Skyfall, but I think that the storytelling wasn't as good in Quantum of Solace. But that's just my opinion. Yeah, it was a good watch, but I didn't feel it sort of merited probably seeing for about the 4th time.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. It's one of the shorter ones. It might be the shortest one even. But
yeah, I didn't.
So the next 00 question is, if you could play any character in the upcoming James Bond film, which part would you love to play and why?
I think that's a bit obvious. I would definitely play Miss Moneypenny, and not just because I feel I know her so well, which I do, but I really like the way that they've rebooted Moneypenny in the new series. I think Naomi Harris is excellent. I think she's brave and sassy, and that's much more how I sort of imagined Moneypenny would be. And so I'd like to sort of rewind the clock back and get into her outfits and start driving cars in interesting places and solving everything for Bond.
Yeah, well, she was very involved in Skyfall.
Amazing.
And then she was much more behind the desk again in Spectre. So we'll see what happens in Bond 25 next year. Last double question is, if you could either interview Ian Fleming, Broccoli and Saltzman, or John Barry, who would you choose and what would you ask?
Definitely Fleming. My involvement in the Bond world is really about the literary Bond. Although I've enjoyed watching the films and listening to John Barry's music, for me it's all about the books. So definitely Fleming. And I did a lot of research into Ian Fleming for my books. So really felt I got to know him a bit, and he's a very complex character. But I'd ask him about Bond. I'd ask him more about Bond's feelings, what he felt about killing. That came in right at the beginning in Casino Royale, but he didn't really go back too much to sort of look into Bond's doubts about what he was doing, what he really felt for his country, whether it was worth it, whether he'd ever really loved anyone, why he did it, what his motivations were. I think Fleming started a little bit along that way, and then it turned increasingly into this sort of slightly fantasy character who was all about doing rather than thinking, or doing rather than feeling. And so I'd like to know about that. But I think that's sort of quite similar to Ian Fleming. So I'd like to try and sort of put him on the couch.
Well, you had it's a great answer first of all, but you had a taste of what it's like to need to write a book almost every year, and you did that for 3 years. And then he was pretty much obligated by the publishers to write a new adventure every year for 14 years, something like that.
Yeah, and he boasted about doing it in 8 weeks, I think.
Yeah, but you can imagine the difficulties he might have had coming up with new ideas, new storylines, new plots and everything.
Yeah, which I think he did absolutely brilliantly. I would have just liked him to put a bit of emotion just a few times, just here and there. It's only sentences, but or for me, it would have helped me to understand the character more.
Do you think you needed to humanize Bond yourself in your books?
Yes, definitely. And I did try and do that. I mean, I tried to, first of all, I read Fleming's books over and over and over and sort of passed them. I really deconstructed them. And then I read a lot about Ian Fleming's life as well. And I tried to sort of meld them a bit together so as to give Bond, because I imagined that Fleming did base a bit of Bond on himself, or what he would have liked himself to be in certain cases. And so I tried to imagine an entire life for Bond. In fact, I did this for Bond and Moneypenny. I wrote long biographies of both of them before I started writing the book, so that I felt I knew the characters inside and out. And also, with Bond, I was kind of helped by Charlie Higson's books, because his first ones had come out just before mine, I think.
Was that 2005 or something?
Yeah, was he? So mine was 2005. I'm sure I read Young Bond before that, whether I saw it in manuscript or not. But, there were bits of it. He'd done very much the same thing. So all those things sort of meshed together. But I really felt I had to know Bond as a person before I could write about him.
Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
Much more so Moneypenny. I mean, I probably wrote a 25,000-word biography of her before I ever started writing in her voice.
Now, I have to ask, that biography, is that available anywhere? Is that just on your computer, or?
It's just on my computer. Whether it's still on my computer, it's probably around. I'm sure it is around somewhere.
You just mentioned Charlie Higson and his Young Bond books, and I don't know if you know this, but after his 5th and final Young Bond adventure, about a year later, there was a special book called The Danger Society, which was like it had a new short story in it, and also lots of background information on the locations and the villains and the weapons that were used.
Oh, I didn't know.
Like an extra edition because of the popularity of the books. So it might be a very nice addition to your trilogy.
Well, it might be. I'm not sure that quite as many people read my books as did his. But,
maybe not, but still, I'm sure that me, for instance, I would love to read that, but there are plenty of geeks out there like myself.
Well, I might see if I can dig it out at some point. I've changed computers since then. They must be around somewhere.
This is before Google Drive, probably. Yeah.
Long before Google Drive. Almost
Okay.
before the internet. No, not quite.
Now, this has been probably the longest introduction double question, so let me get back to the interview.
Okay.
Just briefly, before we go to the character of Moneypenny, I don't know if you remember this, but how did you get involved with the world of James Bond in the first place?
It was quite by chance. My literary agent is called Gillian Aiken. He's now sadly dead. And he was a good friend, and he'd been approached by the Fleming family to be the literary advisor for the estate. And I was just talking to him one day, and he was telling me about this, and he said, "Oh, I'm trying to think of other ideas, not just sort of on continuation novels. What do you think of a Moneypenny biography?" And I went, just immediately, "What about Moneypenny Diaries?" And he went, "Oh, that sounds good. What do would you do that?" And I went, "I'd kill to write those." And it was a sort of 5-minute conversation, and he called me up the next day and went, "Really?" I went, "Yeah." And I wrote a sort of outline proposal, and he introduced me to the Fleming family and Carre, who runs the literary estate, and we took it from there. So it was just pure chance.
But why did you suggest to write a diary? Why was that in the foreground of your mind?
I have no idea. It just suddenly occurred to me. I just thought it's a nice way of telling a story in a different way. Biographies can be a bit static, whereas a diary and a novel, it just seemed that was, what Fleming did. Whereas diaries were a different format and a different way of getting a sort of adventure going and bringing a character to life who hadn't really existed in sort of literary world to a great extent.
So did you ever keep a diary yourself then? Are you experienced?
Not really. As every sort of young girl does, I have flirted with diary keeping over the years, but no, not in detail, not like that. No.
But did that make it difficult for you to make decisions like what would I put in there? What kind of stuff wouldn't I write in a diary? Or
no, I don't think so. I never really thought about that. I think I still approached a diary. It's almost like a first-person narrative of a book. I looked at it with a storytelling arc, and I always had sort of 3 or 4 different threads going through each book. And what I do is plot the book out very, very carefully, and then sort of highlight all the different threads in different colours. So to make sure that each month had a bit of each bit of story, so it sort of kept it going. So I could mix the personal with the professional, with the hunt for the father, with the love story, all that kind of stuff. So I approached it as a novel. There have been sort of examples of novel diaries before, Adrian Mole, for instance. But no, once I was in her head, it seemed quite natural what to put in and what not to.
Oh, wow. Well, we're going to get to the specific diaries in a moment. First of all, let me ask you about the character of Moneypenny. Now, you already said that you're a big fan of Naomi Harris. There are, of course, quite a few other incarnations as well of Miss Moneypenny. The most famous one, obviously, is Lois Maxwell, who started in Dr. No.
Who I spoke to when I was researching the diaries, before she in Australia. We had a lovely chat. She was a wonderful woman.
Oh, that is amazing. I
spoke to her, and I spoke to Samantha Bond.
Did Lois Maxwell pass away in 2007?
Yes. So I must have spoken to... Well, I spoke to her in about 2004 or 5, I think.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. And Samantha Bond as well.
And Caroline Bliss, in fact. I spoke to all three.
So all of them, except Naomi Harris.
Yeah.
And you want her job, so...
Well, I come from a background of non-fiction writing, so I take research very seriously.
Yeah, I can see that. And then, obviously, there's Miss Moneypenny from the Fleming novels. And in his book, she's mostly a very minor character. So how would you describe Miss Moneypenny? Because, like you said, you're already inside her head.
Well, from Fleming's point of view, I don't think he particularly tried to get inside her head. I think she was a woman, she was a secretary, she was professional, and she sort of fancied Bond. From my point of view, I imagined her to be very much a sort of real, rounded, brave character with a very good sense of humour, a very good sort of reader of emotions. I mean, I think I wanted, that everyone supposed from the Bond books that she just adored Bond. But I sort of saw her much more as sort of massaging his ego and treating him a little bit like a little boy who, she obviously was incredibly fond of him and adored him in many ways, but it wasn't this sort of unquestioning sort of adoration. So I saw her as sort of strong, brave, and very, very able.
Yeah, well, she comes across like that in your books. She has quite a few adventures herself. Now, you mentioned before that you wanted to write a diary. It hasn't been done before, and it also forced you, in a way, to make difficult, or I assume they were difficult, concrete decisions, like what were characters called, what were their first names, specific dates that things happened, background stories, everything. Was it difficult to make those decisions for you?
It was fun. It was really, really good fun. Names, I thought a long time, very hard about what to call her. And I decided to call her Jane because I figured that any parents with a surname like Moneypenny would not saddle their daughter with a sort of difficult first name. And then in terms of her parents and things, I liked the idea of a colonial background because that would have meant that she grew up sort of living outside, being resourceful and hardy and stuff like that. So I liked that. In terms of dates, that's what gave me the whole sort of arc of the Moneypenny stories, is that I read through Fleming's books over there, and then I saw that there was a gap in the timeline just before You Only Live Twice, is it? Where Bond had sort of gone missing and supposedly had a nervous breakdown, and after Tracy had died. And so I saw an opportunity to slot my story into that gap because it wasn't covered in Fleming's gap, and also it just seemed to overlap if you looked back at the dates and what was happening at the time with the Cuban Missile Crisis. My idea from the beginning was to try and make the diaries to link them as close to real historical events as possible. And it seemed that this gap in Fleming's timeline coincided with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that gave me a great opportunity to sort of insert Moneypenny and Bond into real history.
Well, I think you did an excellent job of doing that. So your Moneypenny, Jane Vivian Moneypenny, was born in 1931 in Nairobi. While I was listening to the audiobooks, I tried to make extensive notes and try to keep track of the timeline, which really helped me get a grasp of how events happen. Did you make a timeline yourself before you started?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, almost day by day.
Okay.
Very much. And it was quite tricky because what I was trying to do, I had 3 timelines. I basically had my Moneypenny's timeline, I had Ian Fleming's timeline, and then I had the actual timeline of the world. And where I'm mentioning things that happened in Russia and America and Cuba, those are actual dates. The dates are concrete. They're when those things happened. And I actually wrote a lot of you might not have seen if you were just listening to the books, a lot of footnotes which explain those dates and what was happening on those dates. The footnotes are for the geeks.
And those are from the real life events?
Exactly. Well, some are from real life events and some are footnotes that explain characters or events in the real Bond world. So from the beginning, I wanted to make the diary seem as real as possible, so that, in fact, people reading them would think, oh my gosh, maybe there was a real person called Moneypenny. And if there's a real person called Moneypenny, maybe there was a real Bond. So I tried to kind of merge sort of fiction and reality.
I think you did an excellent job because you even mentioned minor events that would have been forgotten normally. I remember distinctly that Moneypenny one morning got to vote. and she was thinking about who she would vote for. It's like, how would you... That would be something that would be relevant on that day, 40, 50 years ago. But that's amazing that you managed to squeeze that stuff in.
Well, thank you.
So let's go to the Moneypenny Diaries in general. So it's been about 10 years now that your last diary, Final Fling, was published. If you look back now at your tenure, have you been able to get some perspective on everything? How do you look back?
I haven't looked back recently until you've persuaded me to. When I finished it, I was really sad to say goodbye to the world because I'd really thrown myself into the world of Fleming and Bond and Moneypenny, and I loved every second of it. It was brilliant fun. I also threw myself into the world of the Bond geeks around and all the different kind of websites and forums, and it was like an alternate reality. And no, I miss it. I feel incredibly lucky and privileged to have been part of it, and life has to go on. But I'm lucky that I did have that opportunity.
Did you feel any pressure if you go into the fan base of getting things wrong? Or
I really, really, really did. And that was why I researched everything very, very carefully. And in fact, maybe Guardian Angel was written too much with the fans in mind. The footnotes, there are probably too many footnotes. And I think some people who aren't or who weren't steeped in the Fleming canon would have found it a bit off-putting. And if they just want to read a sort of adventure story, they would possibly, and I did hear this feedback, that they were possibly being put off by the reams of footnotes that were in there. So the second two books had fewer footnotes.
Well, you make me want to find the books because, like I mentioned, I only listened to the audiobook version, which are brilliantly narrated by Eleanor Bron. But I don't believe she included the footnotes.
I'm ashamed to admit I've never listened to the audio version. So
I think she does a really great job because she has two voices. She has a slightly deeper voice when she narrates Kate's story, and then a slightly higher pitched voice for Jane Moneypenny's story, so you can distinguish whenever someone is explaining what is happening.
I think footnotes would have been far too confusing on the audio versions. But now you've made me want to listen to the audio version. So
yeah, well, you can just try one. They're quite easy to come by. I think Audible.
I've got it all.
Oh, you have them. You just never listened.
Yeah.
So, do you remember what the reception was like when your first book came out?
From the Bond world, it was really, really, really warm, and I was thrilled by that. It was. I think that real Bond fans, whether literary or film, had been a bit wary about it before and thought, oh gosh, they're just trying to squeeze whatever they can out of Fleming's legacy. But I think, I hope they really appreciated it, and particularly the detail that I'd gone into and the respect that I tried to show for sort of Fleming's works. And in the wider world, sort of mixed reception. I got some reviews. I got some criticism for having so many footnotes. I think probably they were best, certainly the early ones were, the early one was best appreciated by people who knew literary Bond rather than the Bond of the films. And I think somehow maybe they were packaged to look a bit more like sort of chick lit, which they really weren't. The early cover, the first one, was a bit pink and sort of bows on it, and I don't think the books were chick lit. Do you?
No, definitely not. No, I think any Bond fan will highly appreciate the books. I mean, they're quite structure-wise, they're very interesting. You get to know a lot of stuff about Bond. As well, about the workings of MI6, and also you get a brand new adventure involving Moneypenny, and you get to learn stuff about her. What I realized just now is that the time that your book came out, because you said that the reception had a notion of they're trying to squeeze everything out of Fleming as much as they can, it might have been because, well, we haven't had an adult continuation novel for 3 years or something, and it almost simultaneously came out with the young Bond novels. So I don't know, that might have something to do with it, that people were a bit, I don't know the English word for this.
So yes, I think that, Bond purists were thinking, we just want another continuation novel. What are these different directions they're trying to go in? But I hope that both Charlie and I managed to assuage their fears, and they enjoyed looking at the world from a different angle.
Yeah, I hope so too. And of course, you might have paved the way for a whole new series of continuation novels, starting with, was it Sebastian Faulks, I think?
Exactly.
2008.
I mean, I think the Fleming estate wanted to restart that world, and they very specifically sort of said to me, just work on the Fleming novels. Those are what you're working from. Don't read the continuation ones, the John Gardner or Raymond Benson ones. I think they wanted to go back to where Bond was then. And I think both Charlie's and mine sort of drew heavily on Fleming's work. I think they wanted to return to Fleming.
Well, that's always good. So,
and I think actually Sebastian's and Williams and everyone who wrote subsequent continuation novels did the same thing. I mean, they were... Again, it was about being true to Ian.
Yeah, they absolutely did. I actually talked to Anthony Horowitz briefly.
Oh, I think he's brilliant. I think his ones have been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
In fact, the best. I think they're fantastic.
It might be. Well, that's all up to personal opinion, of course. But
I mean, from my point of view, not better than Ian Fleming, but as continuation novels, I thought he was really true to Fleming. So that was great.
Yeah. And he also said that he doesn't think of it as continuation novels, but just the next adventure. He doesn't like that term, continuation novel.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
Are you ready to talk about Guardian Angel?
Yes, absolutely.
So it came out in 2005. I had to look this up. And it's also set, the story is set in two timelines. So you have Kate Westbrook's timeline in 2005, who is Moneypenny's niece. Mm-hmm. And she receives, at the beginning of the book, she receives a huge trunk containing, I think, 40 diaries or something.
Yep.
That take her back to her aunt's life that she knew nothing about. And then she picks out the diary of 1962. The book itself alternates between 2005 and 1962. Now, the first question I wrote down here, you already answered that, basically. You begin where the novel On Her Majesty's Secret Service ends, when Bond is tracking Blofeld. You said that you wanted to start there because it had a gap in Fleming's timeline?
Yeah, and also Bond seemed sort of curiously vulnerable then. I remember at the beginning of You Only Live Twice, there was, he'd gone missing for a while. He was I think that he was obviously distraught after his wife's death, and it just sort of gave a sort of entry into a different side of Bond that I was interested in exploring, and it gave Moneypenny a sort of role in his life, and also a sort of way to kind of help him, and just if he was feeling a bit wobbly, to be able to step into things and become more involved herself. Because I really wanted to get her out from behind her typewriter. She had to go out into the world, and she was so capable of it. And we needed a bit more sort of girl power in the literary Bond world, I thought.
Well, yeah, you managed, because at the end of the book, she has her own adventure. The book pretty much goes back and forth between the events that Fleming describes at the end of Majesty's. Then you have Moneypenny's personal life. I think this is because you chose to write a diary, so it goes back and forth each day, whatever happens to happen on that day. So you have a love interest, who is Richard, or R, as you call him. There's a storyline of Helena and Lionel, her sister and her fiancé, and a missing father, Hugh, who complicates the life of Jane Moneypenny. And added to all this, you have the real-world geopolitics, like the Cuba crisis, the popularity of JFK, the fear of communism. Everything is greatly interwoven. How did you manage?
Oh, do you know what? It nearly blew my brains. There were several times where I just didn't know what was real and what wasn't. I was living in different dimensions. But I really plotted everything out very, very, very carefully. I knew what was going to happen in each of the different storylines. And then I just, before I wrote a word, just set up a very clear timeline of what would happen in each month. And then and try to balance it so that none of the ends were left wiggling. So I was just trying to balance it all and keep the story going and keep the emotion going and keep the past going. And yeah, sometimes I felt really, really confused about what was real.
Yeah, I can really imagine. Yeah.
You know, there were so many different realities, but that was part of the fun of it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did you have any experience writing this sort of stuff before?
No, I'd only written non-fiction before that. I'd written 3 non-fiction books. So I'd never written fiction before this. But this is, I only saw this as semi-fiction because I just took Fleming's world as fact. That was part of my research. I was researching both his books, but also his life. And then, so that was for me as much fact as the Cuban Missile Crisis was fact. So it was a bit like a surreal non-fiction detective story with a little bit of sort of fictional overlay, which was Moneypenny's actual character and her daily life and her love life. That was the rest of it was, as far as I was concerned, real life.
That's splendid. Have you read any John le Carre spy novels?
Yeah, no, I've read lots of John le Carre spy novels, which I love. I think he's amazing.
Yeah, I only discovered him, or I decided to try out his novels last year. And then I've read his first 4 novels now. And then I started re-listening to your diaries. And then I found great similarities between the storyline of Richard R., Moneypenny's love interest, in which the tension is building and building, and you don't quite know what is true and what isn't. It feels very much like a John le Carre spy novel.
Well, thank you. That's a massive compliment. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, you're welcome.
That wasn't conscious, but obviously, you know, you get inspired by people like him. And I like books with tension. You've got to build something up and have jeopardy and uncertainty. So, yeah, I read a lot of kind of spy and thrillers, and so some of it must have seeped in.
Yeah, probably, yeah. And I remember now, Anthony Horowitz also told me while he was writing Forever and a Day how difficult he found it to keep track of what was the absolute truth, because lots of characters were constantly lying to each other.
No, exactly.
So how hard was that for you to keep track of the motives?
It's really hard. You know, they're lying to each other and they're fictional characters, and there's no such thing as absolute truth. So you just have to keep going back and thinking, you know, back to who the characters were and what they're doing and why. And as long as you try and hold their motivation in your head, then you can sort of keep it together. But then, you know, sometimes I caught myself out when I sort of reread stuff and thought, no, excuse me, that's you know, he's lied. So there's their fiction, my fiction, Fleming's fiction. I mean, all these different fictions got very, very tangled.
I think it's very wise that you decided early on that basically everything Fleming wrote is truth. Hopefully that keeps it a bit easier. Now, you describe one of his operations, Operation Ruthless, in your first book, which is executed by a group of soldiers, including Daring Jones and you, Moneypenny. Mm-hmm. I believe this is a fictional operation, right?
No, I think Operation Ruthless was real. Gosh, you're catching me out now. I have a feeling that it was either real, or I think that it was something thought up it was based on something that Fleming had thought up when he was working in naval intelligence during the war.
I remember something like that as well. I'm not sure if they actually went through with the operation or not.
Or maybe he just thought about it. I can't remember now. See, you're getting me.
Yeah, but it was about crashing a German plane and dressing up as German spies and hoping to be picked up by a German...
Okay, no, I think about it. No, that was a real idea by Fleming during the war that didn't happen.
So, okay, and then you use that as part of your storyline of what happened to you, Moneypenny. So you already mentioned it quite a few times. You spent lots and lots of time trying to research all the aspects. Was it important for you to include as many small references to Fleming's work as possible?
I thought that was fun, yeah. I wanted to, both Fleming's work and Fleming's life. Yeah, that was important. That sort of anchored the book and gave it a little more weight, I think, and also a bit more confusion for the reader about, is this true? Is it not true? So yes, no, I did. And I also, as part of my research, I went to meet a friend of his who he'd worked with at Naval Intelligence during the war, called Peter Smithers. And he showed me, in fact, he gave me this sort of, he's very old by that stage, and he gave me this sword knife that Fleming had that was concealed within a walking stick that Fleming had invented during the war. And he gave it to me to bring back to the Fleming family. So I learned a lot about what Ian was like at that time, and did a lot of research into special operations executive and naval intelligence, and yeah.
I just finished a book called Equipping James Bond. It just came out last month, I believe, and it's about the evolving technologies of the 20th century and how those influenced the warfare, and people such as Churchill and Ian Fleming both, because they're very fond of new technologies and stuff like that. They absolutely love them and Fleming specifically tried to incorporate as many of them in his books as possible. It's a very interesting read.
I haven't read it. I must go back to it, but I did research the equipment as well.
Some of your small remarks really made me smile, because I saw characters like Darko Karim and Paymaster Troop, Bloody Troop. I love those bits of your book. And then you have Porterfields at Blades and everything. And it feels like pretty much you wrote the other side of the story, the other side of the coin, to Fleming's versions of events. So as a Bond fan, it's wonderful to find out that stuff.
Oh, thank you. That's what I wanted to do. It was just another window onto the same world.
So when I was preparing this interview, I wrote down a question that it feels very authentic and very real when Moneypenny is learning how to use guns. And then I found an interview with you earlier that asked the same question, and you replied that you went through that experience yourself, learning how to shoot.
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit about that?
Well, I did two different things. First of all, I had a shooting lesson in America, where I actually did get to sort of shoot pistols. No, not pistols. Well, can't remember what kind of guns they are. So I felt what it was like to shoot, because I wanted to be able to feel, I'd never shot a gun before. And then in England, I went to our local police, and he's the man in charge of the armory there. You're not allowed to, as a civilian without a license, shoot anything in England, actually handle a gun. But he talked me through all the different guns and let me hold them without ammunition in them, and explained what each one would be like. So yeah, did that too. That was fun.
So how is it to shoot a gun? I have no idea.
You should try. It's it's sort of scary, the power that's in your hands, because I was at this shooting gallery in, I think it was in Florida, and the kickback that you get when you shoot, you can really feel that power. I've never wanted to do it again,
okay.
But I'm glad I did, because I needed to be able to know what it felt.
Yeah. You mentioned Florida. The book ends with Moneypenny on a mission going to Miami and Cuba. Did you go there for research?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's part of the fun of it. I got to go everywhere. I was determined. And I'd never been to Cuba before, and it was fabulous. It was absolutely wonderful. And yeah, I went to all the locations that I wrote about. As I said, I'm a non-fiction writer, so I have to do my research. So if it takes me to wonderful places, so much the better.
Well, it feels very authentic. Now, I don't want to spoil too much about the end of the book, because it immediately continues within your second book, and there are so many dubious characters. And for anyone out there that hasn't read them yet, I don't want to spoil how everything plans out. So your second book, On Secret Servant, that was published in 2006. It was also set, or Kate's story was set in 2006. And we find out about Jane Moneypenny in 1963 and 1964. And it picks up right where Guardian Angel ended. You have a slightly different structure for this book, because the first book, it's pretty much every month starts off with what happens to Kate and then what happens to Jane Moneypenny. And then in this book, you first describe 6 or 7 months consecutively.
No,
No.
No. I think that must be a decision taken by the people on the audiobook. So the same structure, I use the same structure in the book
Okay.
as in the first book. So another reason for you to go and get
Well,
the
yeah,
book.
yeah, okay. I don't need any more convincing. Okay, so that's what I wrote down. The first stint is basically January all the way through to July 63, but it goes back and forth, you say.
Yes, it does.
Okay, now I really have to go get that a copy. But most importantly, the storyline continues. All the doubts. I really like it that each book has a climax, a very tense climax, but also continuing storylines. It's pretty much basically like real life. And then you have a Colonel Boris, Russian Colonel Boris, and his story is interwoven with Fleming's book, The Man with the Golden Gun. It's a very nice touch. Was that intentional, or that just happened to happen, or how did that come about?
No, because now I can't remember, but I would have thought about it before and would have worked it out. Now I'm going to really sort of shame myself and say, was Colonel Boris in The Man with the Golden Gun?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I would have read that before and worked backwards.
And you decided to use him already in your first book?
Yes.
Okay, great. That would have been the smart thing to do, yeah.
I knew what was going to happen. Well, certainly in the first two books, I'd planned that before I started anything. The third book, I hadn't planned. I mean, when the books were sold to a publisher as a trilogy, I'd set out the first two books and what was in them. So I knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, makes sense.
I anticipated Colonel Boris. No, I remember. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, and sometimes I have very detailed questions.
Writer, it's very difficult to go back and read your stuff.
Yeah,
so
I can imagine. Yeah, what I like is that there's a slight shift in Kate's world in 2006. She describes that she lost her job because she wants to publish the diaries. Now already you are slowly sowing the seeds for events about to happen, and the same happens to the idea of the mole within MI6, just whetting our appetites, so to speak, as what's going to happen there.
Well, I hope so. I mean, the whole idea of books is to keep people turning the pages and to involve them in the world, so they want to keep reading. So yes, you need to set things up. Signposting is really important.
One thing struck me, but it might be such a detail that you might not remember it. It struck me that, according to your books, Moneypenny started working at MI6 in 1953, after she moved to London from Kenya. Now, recently I read the novel Goldfinger by Fleming, and he distinctly set the story of Casino Royale in 1951, 2 years before Moneypenny, according to your book, started working there. And in Casino Royale, Moneypenny is already M's secretary.
Oh gosh, very good catch. One of us is wrong. I'm not quite sure who.
Probably Fleming then, right?
He didn't know Moneypenny as well as I did. I think she was a minor character in his books. I think I was trying to, when I wrote this whole biography of Moneypenny, before starting to write the books, I had to work out how old she would be at different times in order to be the right age at the right time to do the right things. So this is how it worked out for me. And I wanted her to leave Kenya at a certain age, and that had to overlap with political events there. So it was probably my mistake, but I'm now trying to blame it on Fleming.
Yeah, that's easier. Yeah, definitely.
He's not around to defend himself.
It's just something, I don't know, I just have to pick it up. It's really okay.
I'm very impressed.
I don't think anyone enjoys James Bond because of its sense of continuity, so that's perfectly fine. What I really like is that the first book centers mostly around Cuba, the missile crisis. It's an exotic country, nice and warm, nice and hot. And then the second book centers around Russia and Kim Philby's defection to Russia. Now, these are real life events, right?
Yeah.
Kim Philby was one of the Cambridge Spies, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And he was, he had a really interesting story. He had the defection. It fitted in with my timeline perfectly. And I've always been fascinated by the Cambridge Spies. And I also always wanted to go to Russia. So it gave me an opportunity to go to Moscow, to research what it would be like. I caught the train from Moscow to St. Petersburg. I went to a prison in St. Petersburg, did all sorts of stuff there, which was really, really exciting. Not as hot, as you point out. But when we went, actually, I went with my husband. When we went, actually, they were having a cold snap, and it was minus 28 degrees.
Ah, that's nice.
Yeah, really, really, really cold. And to do this, I think I read 4 biographies of Kim Philby.
So for anyone who's not familiar with the Cambridge Spies, what can you tell me about them?
So they were sort of well brought up young British men who went to university in Cambridge, and while they were there, they were picked up by, well, they became rather enthralled by the idea of communism. This was during the war, and communism seemed to be a great antidote to Nazism, and they were picked up by the Russians. Managed to get them to work for them undercover for a long time. There was Philby, Burgess, MacLean, and Blunt, who was the 4th one.
And they were quite high up, right, in the British Secret Service?
Yeah, no, I mean, Kim Philby was very high up in MI6 for a long time.
So it was very, what's the proper word for this? Shameful for the British Secret Service?
Yeah, exactly, and they tried to cover it up. They did cover up Blunt, who was a spy for a long time, only got unmasked, I think, in the 1980s, when he was working for the Queen, in charge of curator of her art. So yeah, most of it was covered up at the time. Particularly, Philby was very close to a lot of things that happened and very high up. And there'd been suspicions about him in the past, and then they let him sort of come back in. You know, they sort of almost arrested him, then didn't, and he went off to work for the Observer newspaper as a correspondent in Beirut. And he was supposedly working for the British Secret Intelligence Service, which is MI6, but he was also at the same time working for the Russians all the time. And then it became more and more clear. He was interrogated he was questioned by a friend of his who said, "Look, we know what you've been up to." And then he disappeared and only resurfaced in Moscow. And no one really knew how he did it. So I wanted to both explore that, but also it was a way to, this is what the British really would have wanted, was to get Philby back. So in my sort of fictional world, he changed his mind and wanted to come back. And the Russians weren't letting him. So Moneypenny was the perfect person to go there and try and extract him.
I love that part of the book when she goes to Moscow and she has to make the switch. Was it in Berlin, Checkpoint Charlie?
Yeah, exactly.
And then she travels by train to Moscow and she's waiting there for weeks and weeks trying to contact his wife, who is American, I believe, and sick and tired of Russia.
Yeah.
It's very slow burning on one hand. I read a few reviews of the book that didn't like that nothing really seemed to happen, but for me it was very tense and very spy thriller, authentic like. It might have helped that I've actually been to Moscow about 10, 12 years ago, so I know a bit what it's like there. But yeah, very well done.
Thank you. As I said, I went there and I actually ended up having tea with the last Mrs. Philby, who's still living in the same apartment.
So you were actually, when Kate does that,
yes,
that was you?
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Let me immediately skip to the last question of this section, which is, how much do you resemble Kate?
Not as much as probably I'd like to. Obviously, I'm older than her. I'm not an academic, but I did go to university. I did go to Trinity College, Cambridge, where Kate, I've made her a professor there. Well, bits of her, little bits, but probably not as much as I'd like. Thank you.
Yeah, well done. And next to all this Russia storyline going on and the Cambridge Spies, you also have John F. Kennedy being assassinated. And how difficult was it to imagine what the impact of that was on the world? Because you describe it in both in personal lives for especially Moneypenny's sister, and the world of espionage.
Well, again, I sort of, it was part research and part imagination. But everyone's got a story of what it was like when JFK died.
Is it like nowadays when you ask someone, do you remember where you were on...
died. Yeah, I think it probably was. And, you know, there are lots of books that have been written about it, and I've read a lot about JFK as well.
So about halfway through this book, the story of the man with the golden gun ends, and thus you have completed using Ian Fleming's work. Now, how do you move on from there? Did that make it difficult to continue, or does it give you free rein and make it easier?
Well, at the beginning, I needed to hold on to Fleming's works. They were my framework. That was the world. But I think by that point, I felt I was in it. And yeah, there was a little bit of sort of liberation in being able to get Bond to do different things, and Moneypenny too. So it was a bit of both. It was scary jumping out of that fictional world, but I felt I knew it enough by then that I could continue living in it, but put my own spin on it.
Yeah, you had already your storylines set out, really grounded in the characters. Okay, yeah, I can imagine. Now, you already mentioned that you have neglected all the continuation novels, and now I also noticed this because I don't know if you have read Colonel's Son by Kingsley Amis.
I haven't. I mean, one of your early questions that you didn't ask, but you were going to, was what instructions was I given by the Fleming estate? And one of them was only really read Ian's novels.
Yeah, focus on Fleming. Yeah.
Focus on Fleming. Don't ignore what happens in all the other ones. So I did. And Colonel's Son too. And I still haven't read it, which actually now I'd like to, but at the time...
Well, you could. Yeah, it's a nice standalone adventure. And there are even... I'm a bit hazy on the details, but Fleming only wrote a first draft of Man with the Golden Gun, I believe, before he passed away.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And it is said, I believe, that Kingsley Amis finished the job for him.
Seriously, I'd never heard that.
Finished polishing his drafts.
Well, he's a wonderful writer.
Yeah, and Colonel Son is really nice. But he starts the novel with M being kidnapped and the Hammonds, his caretakers, being assassinated.
Oh, okay.
And in your books, the Hammonds are caring for M until he dies. Yep. So again, I saw some continuity not really matching up. I understand completely.
Okay.
Did you also go to Germany, to Colditz, the castle?
Yeah.
You basically went everywhere you...
Went everywhere.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Went to Colditz, had a tour around the castle, read a book about Colditz and all the escape attempts. In fact, it was a book written by... Oh, I can't remember his name now, who wrote one of the books about Fleming. Anyway.
Was it John Pearson?
No, it wasn't.
Andrew Lycett?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a biography. Oh. Maybe it was a book more about Bond. Oh, and I know him really well.
Oh dear.
So I'm having one of those morning moments. Yeah, carry on.
Okay. Now, I don't want to, again, spoil too much, but Jane Moneypenny goes to Kenya in this book, which is really nice, having her go back to her roots. And she meets a pilot there from Operation Ruthless. And we get a bit more of the storyline of things that happened to you, Moneypenny, in the Second World War. And Jane Moneypenny finds out that you had escaped Colditz, which was a concentration camp, right?
Yes, exactly. It was the most famous concentration camp where British officers were incarcerated if they were caught during the war.
So what was it like to walk around there?
It was extraordinary. I mean, it was really, you could almost imagine and feel the ghosts there. I mean, it's a museum now and you can go and visit. So I think they've very much kept the atmosphere, but it's a sort of cold, bleak place in south of Berlin, and it really brought things to life. Henry Chancellor.
Well done.
He wrote a book about Colditz, and he wrote a book about James Bond. So it was eerie, but it was exciting to visit, and it brought it to life. I could imagine Hugh there, so that was great. And his escape was based on some real life escapes, how people had got out.
It was a very emotional ending, this book. I don't want to get into it too much, but I absolutely loved it, the way that you describe everything that happened with you, but also how Moneypenny finds out with Colonel Boris again. And you have a big part for Bill Tanner, which I really like.
Yeah, so Bill Tanner's been brought back to life in the new films.
Yeah,
Um,
rightly so.
He was a good character in Fleming's books as well.
Yeah, you have him, you humanize Bill Tanner as well, and make him some sort of hero. There's another reason for you to read Colonel's Son, because the book starts with Bond and Tanner playing a round of golf together.
Okay.
Something I would love to see in any Bond film.
Oh, exactly. I will definitely get that. Okay, I'll read it. Thank you.
You might just get a free copy from the Ian Fleming publications if you ask nicely. You know.
Mhm.
So that's Secret Servant. Anything else you want to discuss on your second book?
No, in a way, I really enjoyed doing this book because I'm fascinated by that period in British espionage, and it seemed much more real to me than the Cuban Missile Crisis, because I think the Cambridge spies continue for a long time. Sort of, they're still part of our British psyche. So it was really interesting to research and to meet sort of people who had been involved in it. So it felt very real to me. Yeah, I enjoyed doing that one. I think maybe in some ways it's the sort of less accessible of the three books because it is a bit slower, but I loved writing it.
Yeah.
I loved writing all three of them.
Good. Just minor question just popping into my head is, do you have any experience drawing Russian icons?
No.
Not something you'd like to do?
Why?
Oh, that's something you have Jane Moneypenny do while she's waiting for Philby's wife.
Oh, God.
Endlessly drawing the Russian icons.
I went to that very museum and I looked at the icons, but I didn't draw any. No.
Okay, good. Must have been horribly boring to sit there all day.
A lot of espionage work is boring, and I wanted that to come across too. And in fact, for that book, I met Oleg Gordievsky, who's probably the most famous Russian defector to Britain. So he was sort of the mirror image to Philby. And in fact, I drew a lot on how they extracted Gordievsky from Moscow for my idea of how to well, don't want to give too much away, but Philby's extraction.
But he's also part of your book, isn't he?
Gordievsky.
Yeah, I think Kate meets him, right?
Yes, exactly. So I met him.
Yeah.
From the beginning, my plan was that while Moneypenny was the strongest character in the first book, and then in the second book, her and Kate Westbrook's roles kind of became more and more sort of equal. And by the final book, it was more about Kate. So Kate was taking over from Moneypenny almost as the star of the central character in the trilogy.
Yeah.
So actually, a lot of what I was doing to research Moneypenny's world, I've sort of turned that into sort of what Kate did.
Yeah, that's really nice. Shall we move on to your final book then, Final Fling?
My final fling, yes.
Yeah, it was published in 2008.
Yep.
And it was set in 2007, and Moneypenny's timeline was in 1964, 1965.
Yes.
So the first book is basically around Cuba, the second book about Russia, and this one, the story is mainly set within the UK, and it focuses mostly on MI6 hunt for the suspected mole, or sieve, it's called.
Exactly. I mean, it just struck me that I'd been sort of setting up sort of hints about the sieve through the first two books. It's such a trope of spy novels to try and find the mole. There's always a mole somewhere. All spying is about defectors and double agents and things. So this seemed to draw together quite a lot of what had been happening in the last two books.
Yeah, and it does make sense, especially from Moneypenny's point of view, but nobody seems to believe her, which is quite sad. She doesn't trust anyone, and then she's sent to Jamaica to get rid of her.
Yeah, well, I did want to go off to Jamaica.
So you went to Jamaica yourself as well? You had to.
In fact, I had to. It was really tough. In fact, I was invited there to write a travel article about GoldenEye. And so I had a great opportunity to go there. I slept in Fleming's bed, sat at his desk, swam off the little beach where he used to swim every morning while he was writing it. And that was an extraordinary experience. Really, really, really wonderful.
That is my absolute dream one day to go there, but I'm not sure if I can make it. But
You should become a travel writer.
Oh yeah.
So that was wonderful. While I was writing the book, everyone was preparing for the Fleming centenary in 2008. So it also seemed to make sense to take it back to where he wrote the book. So I wanted to have an aspect of that in it. So it was lovely to have that little Jamaica bit.
Yeah, that's really nice. What I really like about the Jamaica part is you continue Mary Goodnight's story. She marries.
Yeah.
One question about that, because James is invited to the wedding and he goes there and they all have some good fun. Now it's 2019 and I noticed that James grabs Moneypenny's behind and it's all in good fun and Moneypenny doesn't seem to mind that much. But would you still write that scene now?
Oh, it's a really good point. I'd forgotten about that scene. It seemed very in character for Bond.
It does, yeah.
I think he would have had a few problems in 2019 with me too. I mean, gosh, it was the least of some of the stuff he did. He was, and Fleming too, to a great extent. They were creatures of their time, and that was a time of great chauvinism. So I think I might write it, but I might have Moneypenny responding rather differently. But she saw him, do you know what? She saw him as this sort of overgrown schoolboy in lots of ways. And, James, that was sort of part of it. I would have still written it, yes. I would have had her respond slightly differently, possibly, but not really, because, this is set in 1960. This is how it was. I couldn't make it too politically correct. I wanted to redress the sort of gender stuff to a great degree by giving Moneypenny the power to go off and do her own stuff and make her own decisions and not just sit there and simper. But, I can't change Bond's character. He would have done it.
Yeah,
and
probably,
he would have laughed it off. And, so yes, I probably still would have done it.
Yeah. Now, the book starts with some great tension concerning 009's mission in Vienna. You call him Mark, which is always nice to find out about another 00. And doesn't end very well for Mark. And there's all this tension, who's the mole, who betrayed 009, and you introduce lots of new characters as well. You have Kit Hunter and Percy Warren. They try to oust M. They want to take over his job. There's lots of intrigue and backstabbing going on within MI6. Does this reflect the difficult times the British Secret Service had in the mid-60s?
Yes, I mean, to some degree, yes. I mean, that was the period where the Cambridge spies were being unmasked, and there were still some moles within the service. As I said, Blunt didn't get exposed till the 1980s. So at that time, no one trusted anyone. So I wanted to be as true to what it was like at that time in SIS, MI6. as I possibly could. So yes.
It seems like it's a really nasty time to be part of it. I mean, I wonder, why would you stick around there?
Because it was my job, if I'm Moneypenny, and because, someone had to. I think people at that time, most of them really believed that they had to, they had responsibilities to their country, and the Russian threat was real and present. It came to the brink of nuclear war in 1961. So it was the Russians. The Cold War was very real and very present. And so I think, especially knowing that some people were betraying the service, other people would have felt really honor bound to kind of try and fix things.
It must have been a very frustrating time. I'm glad that I'm not part of that. But you describe it really well. I mean, you can just feel the tension and the frustration, things that go on.
Yeah, thank you.
Another point I want to make is in your final book, the role of the mole increases, both in Moneypenny's storyline as well as in Kate's. And nobody in both timelines seems to want to help them. That's kind of frustrating.
Yes, I think it must have been for them. In Moneypenny's case, she was still probably seen as the secretary, the woman. No one's listening to her. All these men who had sort of their own things their own problems, and they were all involved in some sort of intrigue. I just think about, I don't know, Brexit today. All these politicians who all have their own agendas and their own things that they're trying to achieve. And I think that Moneypenny was just someone trying to sort it out. And Kate, well, I wanted her story to start mirroring Moneypenny as I thought it would. And secrets stay in the Secret Service, even when they're discovered. They still stay within there because there's a culture of secrecy, and B, no one wants to be made to look silly after the event. So it seemed real to me. It seemed plausible.
Yeah, okay. I got a question about Jane Moneypenny's character. In your final book, she helps out a new secretary, Hilary. Hilary is approached by a man called Nikolai. And it looks as if Hilary is being recruited by the Russians. And Moneypenny has very little empathy for Hilary. But isn't this exactly what happened to Moneypenny herself when she meets Zack in Guardian Angel?
Yeah, well, you know that if you make mistakes, you want to cover them up. Yes, you're absolutely right about that. And yeah, she probably was a bit harsh. But I guess she saw the possible danger in it and thought, no, you got to...
No empathy for Hilary.
No,
she's quickly dispatched of as well.
I know, Moneypenny was getting into her stride then. She was a strong woman and she was trying to sort things out.
Okay, well, rightly so. So, like you mentioned, Kate Westbrook takes over a large part of this book. It's about halfway, just a bit further than halfway through. The story switches to Kate. And what I really like is that the timelines, like you said, they really mirror each other. They're smartly interwoven. And you go all the way back to the way you started Guardian Angel when Kate goes to North Uist.
Yeah, I went there too.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to ask anymore. I just assumed that you've been traveling around. I had some trouble finding it because listening to the audiobooks, I didn't know how to spell North Uist, but I managed to find it.
It's beautiful. It's amazing.
What is it like? It's being described as reminiscent of Kenya, even.
Well, in that they're big skies, lots of space, and I mean it's not like Kenya in terms that it's a small island. Well, it's half an island. There's North and South Uist that are connected by a causeway, but the huge empty beaches and wilderness. And where Kenya, you get that feeling of space because of empty landscape. There you got it because you're next to the sea and the next stop is America. So it had that feeling of big wilderness, big skies. And I could just imagine her going there.
Is it rough out there?
What do you mean, the sea's rough?
Yeah, the nature. I can just imagine the rocks, the sea, the wind.
Yeah, it is pretty, but it is quite rough. They're also incredible long white beaches with not a soul on them. The sea's quite cold, but it's beautiful. Really, really, really beautiful.
Oh, I've never been.
Okay, it's another place to go.
Yeah, just add it to the list. And Kate goes there because she wants to research her aunt's death, because these are also some of the decisions that you had to make. Moneypenny dies in 1990, which is very sad to hear. And that's the way you start your very first book. And all of a sudden, for reasons that I won't go into too much without spoiling it, Kate wants to research how that actually happened. Her research seems to mirror what happened to Moneypenny herself when she's trying to uncover the sieve. Was it difficult to write that part?
I think by that point I was really in my stride and I was having such fun with it. It was difficult because it was about Moneypenny's death, and Moneypenny was a real person to me by that stage. And sort of part of who I am, who I was then. I was sort of not schizophrenic. I had many personalities. But, the diaries would have never come into being if Moneypenny hadn't died. And then Kate needed to get in some sort of danger herself to keep the suspense and the tension going. And I liked the idea that there was a sort of echoing of what had happened earlier. So it wasn't difficult to write. It was fun to write. But it was, I felt quite tense myself. I remember those last few chapters, I sort of wrote them very, very quickly and couldn't sort of come out of it. I was practically not sort of sleeping and eating. I was racing at that point because the story was then telling itself.
Yeah, and we are nearing the end now, so it
yeah.
all comes together. Just briefly, before I go to my final questions on this book, about M, because you also have M resign, and it has a huge impact on Moneypenny. It happens in 65. Later, in hindsight, we find out that M is being reinstated, but his health deteriorates and he finally dies in 1989. You have Moneypenny staying loyal to him to the end, and she receives his mole file, and this is like a treasure trove. It's almost like a deus ex machina. That always comes in handy, right? I mean, if you're stuck in a story, then this can help you get out and fill in the missing, fill in the blanks.
Yeah, like someone having a dream. Oh, yeah, I found out about it in my dream. But yes, it did. It helped. But I think I'd sort of set it up as well. Someone had to have that file. So it was nice that M had it. And we needed to find a way to... I mean, you can imagine M sort of being obsessed with trying to find this mole that he knew was there. And we needed to find a way for Kate to find out about it.
Yeah, definitely. We need closure. So
you need closure.
How do you see M as a character?
Oh, I sort of loved M. I think M is very well drawn in both the books and the movies. He's grumpy. He's sort of secretive. He's all powerful. But I think he's got a soft centre.
So who do you picture when you write about him? Is it Bernard Lee or just a blank face? Or
No, it's Bernard Lee. I mean, there were some characters that because they weren't because I wasn't making them do anything different, really, apart from M at the end. It was hard to get Bernard Lee's face out of my head.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And I think that M in the films and M in the books aren't that different.
I agree. Yeah, they are. So, without giving away too many spoilers, the ending, it's very thrilling. Like you said, it almost wrote itself. I felt it was very Agatha Christie-like. It reminded me of And Then There Were None.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when there were 10 people on the island. And
yeah.
I imagine North US looks a bit like that. How was it for you to come to the end of the project?
Sad. I was exhausted. I'd been writing them at the time. I started them when my daughter was 1. And so finished them when she was 4. Wrote a book a year, as well as being a mother to 2 small children. I was really, really tired. And but I was so a part of that world, and it felt sort of like leaving all my friends and leaving, sort of like when you leave school and you're not going to see anyone again. It was really, really hard to leave. It was sad, but I couldn't have done another one. I would have burnt out.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And in fact, I haven't been able to write a book since. I'd like to again at some point, but it was very, very intense at that period of my life with small children to be writing 3 novels, and I'd never written novels before. So it was bittersweet, but I still miss it. It was a fabulous, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. And as I said, I feel so privileged. And it was lovely.
Oh, that's so good to hear. And I absolutely love the very final sentence of the book.
That came to me really late on. I'd planned everything, most of everything else, but that last bit, the last storyline, that last little bit of storyline came very late. And then when I realised it, I thought, yeah, that's it. Boom.
Yeah, it was absolutely incredible. The very first time I listened to your books, it struck me like a thunderbolt. I like, what just happened? I had to go back.
Yeah, well, that's what happened to me, is that because it came quite late on, I then had to go back through the book and make it work.
Yeah, I'm not going to spoil it. So if listeners have no idea what we're talking about, they just have to read your books. But it's wonderful. So I believe, as a trilogy, that your diaries are a wonderful set of stories that come full circle. Now, the tendency nowadays is to always end your story with a cliffhanger, so you have a possibility to continue. Was that ever considered for you? No. It was
3
always
books.
That's
as a trilogy, boom, that was it. I loved it. It was a real departure for me because I'd only done non-fiction before, and it was amazing. It was wonderful, but it was always going to be a trilogy, and I planned it as such. And I don't think there's a possibility to continue it. I think I closed it.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah.
And it's nice to get out when you're still loving something.
Definitely. You have to end on a high. So what have you been doing since?
I took a bit of time off, and for the last 8 years I've been working as a journalist. I worked for The Economist, for a magazine called 1843, which is The Economist's bi-monthly sort of long read features lifestyle magazine. I do that part-time, and I live in Wiltshire and do a bit of freelance writing. And I'd like to go back and write some more books at some point. But
that sounds really nice, really good.
Clearing the head and life around me in order to be able to do that. So I will.
Do you have any plans for the future concerning 007 besides going to see the new film next year?
Hopefully, I'll definitely do that. No, I don't. I'm now going to go and read Colonel's son.
Right, yeah.
But no, I don't. I think that it was a lovely period of my life, but I'm now very much on the outskirts of it, and it's a lovely thing to peek back into and to have an opportunity like this to talk about. But no, I don't have any plans.
Well, you already are part of the lexicon now, so
okay, thank you.
Excellent. Samantha, I would really like to thank you for your time. It's been my absolute pleasure to be talking to you. Would it be all right if we close off with a few 00 questions again?
Yeah.
I have to change them a bit because you are the first woman that I interview, so I had to change a few of the questions slightly. The first one is, if you could go on a date with any of the Bond actors, who would you choose and what would you do?
It would definitely be Sean Connery, and I'd like to go dancing with him in a nightclub in Jamaica in the 1960s.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I might even like that. Excellent answer.
Black tie and calypso music and great.
Love that. Great answer. Yeah. So, how do you take your vodka martini?
Dirty.
You like vodka martinis?
Yep. So, dirty martini is when you have some of the olive water in it. But I don't drink them very often. They're a bit strong for me.
I can imagine. I only had one in my life. And as I described it to a friend I was trying them out with, I said something like, it smells and tastes like something that you could burn. But yeah, that's my experience. Is there any particular Bond song or music cue that you like? Or do you that you think Moneypenny would like?
Nobody Does It Better. I really like that one.
That's a good one. You mean the Carre Simon version or the instrumental? Or
no, Carre Simon. Okay. I love Carre Simon anyway.
Okay, that's a very good call. And then lastly, I always ask my interviewees if they could quote the famous line, "My name is Bond, James Bond." But I thought that you might prefer the line from Skyfall when Naomi Harris says, "My name is Eve Moneypenny." You can choose.
Well, actually, could I say, "My name is Moneypenny, Jane Moneypenny"?
Well, there you go. That was my interview with the lovely Samantha Weinberg. I have to say I'm well pleased with the final interview. There were multiple technical difficulties and interruptions during our chat, but I'd like to think I managed to edit it all together quite nicely into a coherent conversation. So, for everybody out there who hasn't read or listened to the Moneypenny Diaries, I can only say get a copy from your local library or buy them from eBay or Amazon or download the audiobook version. They really are fantastic spy novels set in the 60s. Well, at least partly set in the 60s. And most importantly, within the world Ian Fleming created. And Samantha does a fantastic job writing these books, juggling different timelines and plot lines. Anyway, I just can't stress enough how much I like the Moneypenny Diaries. What struck me most from the interview about Samantha Weinberg was her dedication to writing these stories. She plotted the story arc from the beginning and did extensive research, not only into Fleming and his background, but into every little detail she was going to write about. She went to each and every location and talked to as many people as possible. Now I have to admit I was feeling rather jealous when she mentioned she met all the actresses that have played Miss Moneypenny, save Naomi Harris. It must have been amazing to be able to talk to Lois Maxwell, Caroline Bliss, and Samantha Bond. Oh well. Oh, and obviously I was even more jealous when she mentioned she stayed at GoldenEye in Jamaica, and she even slept in Ian Fleming's bed. Imagine that. All part of her necessary research. Yeah. Well, anyway, I really hope you liked the interview. I did my best to come up with some interesting questions. But while I was re-listening and editing the interview, I constantly came up with alternative questions, and I noticed missed opportunities to certain answers. But, then again, it just goes the way it goes, I guess. And that brings me to the end of this podcast. I would love to hear from you. Any feedback you want to send, any questions, any suggestions, please get in touch. You can send an email to moneypenny@the00files.com, or you can look for the 00 Files on social media. Now, normally I would simply finish the podcast with the song that was mentioned by Samantha, the beautiful Nobody Does It Better, sung by Carly Simon. But before you can listen to that beautiful song, I wanted to share another audio clip from the Moneypenny Diaries. It's from the third book, Final Fling, and when I was listening to the audiobooks, this part really stood out to me. It has some tension, it reveals something of the inner workings of MI6, and it shows some good old plain fun between Moneypenny and James Bond. I hope you like it too. Until next time, everybody, the 00 Files will return.
Friday, the 2nd of October. I think I'm being followed. I keep spotting faces that I'm sure I've seen before, but as soon as they notice me looking at them, they seem to melt away. I've tried the usual evasive manoeuvres, but I never catch them on my tail. Whoever they are, they know what they're doing. If they're there, of course. Perhaps I'm becoming paranoid, succumbing to the office malaise of perpetual suspicion. I feel it even at home. I find myself drawing the curtains as soon as I get in, and peering through the chinks to see whether I can pick out anyone lurking outside. Why, though? Why would anyone be interested in me? Tuesday, the 6th of October. Home, thank God. And my hands have finally stopped shaking enough to allow me to write. It was an horrendous experience. I was walking through the new underpass at Hyde Park Corner on my way back from work this evening. It was already dark, and I was on my own. Suddenly, I felt a hand coil around my neck from behind and jerk me back. I hadn't a second to react, and I couldn't move from the vice-like grip. I felt my bag being tugged from my hand. Then I fell to the ground, hitting my forehead against the wall. The stench of urine crawled up my nostrils as I struggled to my feet. I could hear running footsteps and just make out the shadow of a person in a long dark coat and cap running towards the far exit. My legs were shaking as I leaned against the wall to catch my breath. Mostly, I felt angry that my bag had been taken. It was Ma's, one of the few things that I have of hers, and I treasure it. My purse and keys were inside, and a book. Not much, but again, too much. I wanted to strike at something or somebody. Why me? Why did I have to be mugged? Why was I being followed? Why have I involved myself in this world of shadows where violence is an accepted reality and enemies hide round every corner? If I could have, at that very moment, I would have resigned from the service. I walked the rest of the way home. I couldn't face reporting it to the police. What could they have done? I rang the bell to the basement flat, but Maura was out, so I had to wait on the doorstep for nearly an hour, with a graze on my head and no book to distract me, waiting for her to return with my spare key. When I eventually got in, I called the office to report what had happened. They suggested sending a special branch officer to take a statement, but I begged them not to. All I wanted was a bath and a cup of cocoa, and to go to bed. Now I can't sleep, of course. I feel as if the eyes of my imaginary watcher are searing through the drawn curtains. Wednesday, the 7th of October. Bill was pacing up and down my office when I arrived, slightly late, after giving a statement to Troop about last night's events. After minute questioning, He made me wait half an hour for a new security pass. Bloody troop. They could patent him as a cure for low blood pressure. I eventually made it to the piece of the 8th floor. I hung up my coat and was halfway across the room to my desk when a sharp voice stopped me. "How could you let that happen?" Bill demanded from the doorway. "Hello, Bill," I said. "You could have been hurt. You could have compromised office security." "Well, I wasn't, and I didn't. And thank you, I'm feeling fine now." He turned to leave, muttering as he went, "I knew that Jamaica was the right place for you. Why did you ever come back?" As the door closed behind him, I realized, with a start, that he had orchestrated my placement there. Why, though? Why did he want me out of the way? As I was leaving this evening, I ran into James driving out of the car park in his ostentatious battleship of a car. When he saw the sticking plaster on my head, he opened the passenger door and pulled me inside. There was barely time to protest against my kidnapping before he drew up outside the Ritz and threw the keys to the doorman. "You need a drink, Penny," he said, and bore me off to the bar, where he ordered a double whiskey and a vodka gimlet for me. We sat down in a quiet corner. "What's up? Who's been assaulting you? Tell me and I'll show them what a headache feels like." "That's awfully kind of you," I said. "I'm sure it was just a random opportunist taking advantage of a vulnerable lady." "You vulnerable? Pull the other one, Penny. I've seen your elbows and knees in action, and I'd not be surprised if he was nursing a bucket full of broken bones." I laughed. James has an unfailing ability to make things seem better. I told him what Bill had said, and asked why he thought I was being shoved aside. "Beats me, Penny," he said. "They all seem to be going off half-cocked at the moment. The old man's like a ship in dry dock. As for Bill, I've never seen him like this. It's as if he's a different person. We need to find out what's eating them. How about if I take Bill out for dinner at Scott's? A dozen oysters and some tétangé should loosen him up. You can tackle the powder vine. If anything's up, they're sure to know, even if they don't realize it. If that doesn't work, we'll widen the scope of our investigation." "You sound just like a policeman," I told him. "If you're not careful, Miss Moneypenny, I'll—" "What? Use your truncheon on me?" We ordered more drinks and continued to talk. Suddenly James looked at his watch, grabbed his coat and ushered me to the door, muttering that he was sorry he couldn't drop me home, but he was already running late for an engagement. I wonder whether her husband knows.